Today we're building a playhouse for our kids, but this exact design could easily be scaled up into a shed to store things, a backyard office, your home gym, a warming house, or even a hangout spot. My goal is to give you some ideas and the confidence to get started, because if you can build this, you can build it bigger. I started by unloading the 2x4 and 2x6 boards I picked up at the lumberyard. Our oldest had been wanting a playhouse, so I figured it was time to get started. Man, is it beautiful outside. We're gonna start by squaring up the boards, so I'm gonna make a fresh cut on the ends of each board, and then we'll measure off from that to get our lengths. The platform that will form the floor is made out of 2x6 pressure-treated lumber. We'll measure from that square end 6 feet. A total of 8 boards are cut as joists for the floor. We have the first 2 boards cut at 6 feet, so then we're going to take 3 inches off of the other ones, so they'll be 5 foot 9 inches. A miter saw works great to make these cuts, but a circular saw would do the job as well. Take a look at each board to make sure the crown side faces up to help ensure your platform is nice and level for years to come. All we're doing is building a box. We're assembling the shed in the driveway close to the garage with all the tools, and it's going to be moved later, which is a big benefit to building it on skids. Otherwise, you could build it in place on piers, concrete blocks, a concrete pad, or a flat gravel bed. Our 3-year-old is really into being a big helper around the house, and he's having fun with learning how to build things. So he will be joining for parts of the build as we make the play set for him and his 1-year-old sister. That was so good, bud. Let's do this side.
Dad, I'll go get more screws for you, okay?
Thanks, buddy. And right here. We are pre-drilling and using 3.5 inch long deck screws at each corner. All right, so we'll measure for the studs. We're gonna measure 16 inches on center, okay? So we'll go to 16. And the red marks are gonna be where all the studs will go. So we go 3/4 in front of 16. So 15 1/4, we'll go 16 3/4. That leaves an 1.5 inch gap for our stud. We'll go to 32, we'll go 3/4 before, 3/4 after. Put an X for the stud. We'll go to 48, we'll go 3/4 before, 3/4 after. Put an X in the middle. And we'll go to 64, and we'll go 3/4 before and 3/4 after. And we'll put an X. So that's where our studs are gonna go. Now the only thing, if you are going to be putting it on a wood post, for instance, if it's going up on a treehouse, you may need to shift your last stud just a little bit. Take this out from the left side again. We'll go to 15 1/4, 16 3/4, put an X in the middle. Then it's just a matter of repeating that exact same layout process so the studs in the wall go up straight. So you can see these a little better. We'll mark everything. Do you know what a stud is? You're looking at it. Right here. Well, let's put this first one in. Each board is laid with the crown side up, so if it does have a slight curve, it will eventually push down and be level, as opposed to creating a dip or a low spot if the crown side was facing down and were to sag over time. Perfect, bud. That looks great. Take your time lining everything up so the joists are all even with the tops of the rim joists on each end.
Daddy, I can put that one in.
Keep going. Perfect. High five. Woo. It was time for dinner, so I rolled the workbench into the garage and called it a day. This should be exactly 6 feet, so we'll measure this to double check. 6 feet. We're using some old 4x4 pressure-treated posts I had laying on a pallet in the backyard. I like building smaller structures like this on skids in case you ever want to move it, And for a playhouse, you could always load it on a trailer and give it to another family someday when the kids grow out of it, or you could take it with you if you move. And then we want to make sure that this is nice and square before we cinch the 4x4s to it. So we'll hook it at the end. And then we always want to make sure that we read from the same direction. I have 102 and an eighth over here. I have 101 and 3/4. So we need to extend this a little bit. 101 and 7/8. 101 and about 7/8. You could attach the skids with long screws or nails, but today I'm going to use brackets, which work great as well, and we'll just use some short structural screws. The main reason we're doing this is because if I ever want to turn it into sort of a tree fort where I put it up on some posts and it's just higher and off the ground, I can remove the skids. So we're just going to put these in. I'm using Simpson structural screws for each of the connections and making sure there are plenty of brackets to connect each joist to the 4x4 skid underneath. And then we'll find the center. This is 6 feet wide. So we'll find 3 feet. Find the center. And then we can place our 4x4 right underneath. Kind of crazy, but I built this in February and I didn't even need to wear a coat most of the time. We had the most mild winter we've ever had. I normally wouldn't think to start a shed project during the coldest month of the year, but with temps in the 40s and 50s, why not? So now we'll tie this center 4x4 into place. Then it's just a matter of putting in a bunch more screws to secure everything. Buildings on skids can be moved on a truck and trailer if you ever need to, or you can use heavy equipment to move them around your property. We might build a pole barn where the sheds are currently, so we'll be able to sell them or move them to a different part of the property if we'd ever need to. I designed this small shed as I went, but this was a quick sketch I made of the roof pitch and window placements. I wanted it to be good sized for a playhouse, but still a cozy and fun small space for our little kids. The next step was to run to the home improvement store to pick up some 3/4 inch thick tongue and groove OSB subfloor. Definitely overkill for a playhouse, but this is what I'd use to build a larger shed. I test fit the first sheet and marked where it ended so I'd know where to apply adhesive. And then I like to run some construction adhesive so that we don't have any squeaks. If you are interested in the cost to build this playhouse, stick around to the end where I break it down and share the exact cost to build this, as well as an estimate to what it might cost to build a 10x10 or an 8x8 shed. Let's put this in place. I always use screws to attach the subfloor to the joists as it helps prevent squeaks and it gets a nice tight connection. Then I snap chalk lines to help make sure I get the fastener into the center of the joist below it. The sheet is 4 feet by 8 feet, so I snapped a chalk line at the 6 foot mark and it made a cut so it would end flush with the outer joist. You can of course cut this once it's already on the platform, or you can do it prior. One thing I should point out is you would usually have the rough side with the lines facing up, but since this will likely be the finished floor and I may just clear coat it, I wanted the smoother side without the lines to face up since it also looks a little nicer. One thing I messed up on though, as I just wasn't really thinking when I attached that first sheet, is that you should have the groove side facing toward where that next board will go, and then put the tongue of that second sheet into the groove. It's just going to make getting them together a little bit easier. I did a screw about every 6 inches around the perimeter of the platform and every 12 inches down each joist, which is called in the field. Now that we have the skids on, we do want to level the platform to make sure that the rest of the project goes smoothly. Here I'm just using some scrap boards to raise the platform and get it as level as I can. We'll start by building the rear wall first. That's going to be our shorter wall. And it's going to be the exact same width as our platform, which is 6 feet. We'll cut the top and bottom plate to 6 feet. The rear wall is going to be about 4.5 feet tall with the top and bottom plates added to the vertical studs. Next, we'll cut the studs for our rear wall. You want to check your boards for crown side because if you do have any bow, you want it facing toward your exterior wall. And then we'll put the bottom plate and top plate together and we'll lay out where our 16-inch on-center walls will go. So make sure that the bottom plate and top plate are flush on each end. and mark for our studs. So we'll of course have a stud at each end. It's going to go 1.5 inches in. We'll have a stud at this end that's 1.5 inches in. 16 inches will be on center, but you want to measure 3/4 inches back, 3/4 inches forward, put an X. We'll go to 32, and then we'll go 3/4 inches back, 3/4 inches forward, and we'll put an X. We'll go to 48, again, 3/4 back, 3/4 forward, put an X. And then we'll go to the last, which is 64, so we'll just go 3/4 back, which is 63 1/4, and then we'll go to 64 3/4, put an X. So we'll have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 studs, and then we'll add one for each end if you need to do California corners to tie in some drywall or an interior wall. So basically we'll just make an L, and we want to make sure that nice and flush. And then I do like to pre-drill for these ones. Then once you get that first one on, I like to rotate it and then pre-drill. And that is your first California corner. The reason I'm using 3 and 3.5 inch coated deck screws is because this project is geared toward the average DIYer who might not have a nail gun or the patience or skill to pound in a ton of nails with an old-fashioned hammer. If you do decide or plan to scale up this project in size, I would use nails though for improved shear strength, to meet code if required, and to just speed up the overall process because using a nail gun is quite a bit faster. But for a small 6x6 playhouse like this one, the screws will work just fine. I'm just going to pull it up. There's a couple ways to hang your siding panels. One is to put a ledger board down here and then hang each panel one at a time. The other is to do it before the wall goes up, and you can basically set this on the ground and then put it on that way. So we'll try that for this back wall just to show you. We're gonna be doing a double top plate so we can connect each of the side walls to the back and really secure everything in place. So at 6 feet, we'll do 7 inches less, which is gonna be 65. Put our double top plate on here. Our double top plate is on, and then we can measure down and see how far we want to go with the siding. I'm going to leave about 1 inch on the bottom, so let's say 50, let's go 57.5. We'll put on this paneling from left to right, and we want to make sure that we'll be able to overlap with the next board. So we have this oriented correctly. And then we'll measure up, and I'm actually going to cut the top side because I'd rather have a perfectly straight lower line since we're not necessarily going to see the top. This is going to be covered with trim. I'm using a 2-inch thick piece of pink foam board to make the cuts on. This is a little trick that gives you full support to the sheet while making the cut and allows you to make the cut on the ground. So I have it flush with the double top plate. And then now would be a good time to grab your siding nailer if you have one. We're just gonna use screws for simplicity today. And I'll get it locked in. And now we'll just measure for that second piece. Basically going to be 24 inches. So we'll make that cut, which is basically going to be right at the seam. So I'm gonna mark where I wanna go. I used about 2-inch long screws to attach the panels, and pre-drilling through the panel is sometimes helpful for the first corner screws since the LP Smart siding can have some resin that makes it tough to get that screw started. Stand that first wall up and secure it to the platform using 3.5-inch screws or nails to connect it into the outer joists and the joists below. We'll do the side wall next. Obviously, we're going to have a front wall here, and it's going to need to fit between the two. So basically, you'll take 7 inches off of 6 feet. Which is going to be about 65 inches. Now, when you're building the second wall, you want to make sure to burn the first 3.5 inches or to start your measurements from here for where your 16-inch on center marks will go. Otherwise, your siding is not going to line up. So we'll start from the corner of our 2x4, and we'll just measure over here, drop that, or you can just start at 3.5. I laid everything out before connecting everything just to make sure that the placement is how we want it for the window. So I'll disassemble it now and kind of show you this wall going together. All right, we'll start building this wall. And then we'll measure off this end wall to find the center for our window, which will be at 36. And then the rough opening needs to be at least 35 inches. I'm gonna give it a little bit of play. So we're gonna go about 35.25. So I'll measure to each side. I'm just gonna flip this out of the way while I build the sill area. So then we just need to connect this, which is the sill plate. For the headers, we're just going to use 2x4s, and then we'll sandwich a piece of 1/2-inch plywood that was just a scrap piece in between so that we get a 3.5-inch width. Again, a lot of this is overkill for a small window and structure of this size, but my hope is this video gives you inspiration to build something bigger and that you can use some of what you've watched to help with whatever you dream up. All right, then we'll lay this back down. Put that in. There we go. And then we just have our cripples down here. That looks pretty good. Stand the sidewall up and connect it to the platform and rear wall. Now I got the wall up and realized I didn't run a jack stud all the way up to help support the header, which is what you'd want to do for a larger structure. So I figured I'd show how I fixed my mistake by making some cuts and adding some additional support. And then the king studs run all the way from your top plate to your bottom plate, and they're next to your jack stud, which typically supports headers. So both king and jack studs are next to window and door openings. Then it was time to move on to the third wall, which is framed similar to how you just framed the last one, and it has the same size window. I found all the windows for the Playhouse on Amazon. They were really affordable. The 35 by 10 inch side windows were only $35 a piece on Amazon at the time this was built, and they're perfect for a storage shed, a chicken coop, or a playhouse. There we go, it's gonna fit. I began attaching each of the boards using 2 fasteners at the top and bottom of each 2x4. Please note that we try to edit the videos to be as efficient as possible without being too long, so many of the screws or fasteners going in are not shown. Square up your wall as best you can once it's assembled. I'll tack on a scrap board to lock it in place if needed, or if it's close enough for me, I'll just put it up. 82 and slightly more than a half. 82 and slightly more than a half. That's pretty much perfectly square. That doesn't happen very often. We'll throw a couple screws in here to prepare. Sometimes it helps to use a couple clamps to pull together the walls where you connect them. Additionally, this should help square things up a bit as well. Then add the top plate to each sidewall using about 2.5-inch long screws or nails. The top plate will secure the sidewalls to the rear wall and start making it real strong. We'll check for plumb. This side will get pulled in a little bit once we put on that front wall. Nice, looking good. Okay, we're loaded up, headed to Home Depot. You guys ready?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Let's see how this goes. Okay, we got our wood, got Jack, got Ava. Success. I started working on the front wall, which has a height of about 6 feet for the framing, and this is about an 18-inch rise over 6 feet, which will give the roof close to a 312 pitch. And we're just going to find the center, which is at 36 inches, because we're going to center our door. So I'm just going to make the rough opening 24 inches. We'll slide this right to 12, and then we'll measure over. We'll put a mark at 24 and at 0 basically. I'm doing California corners on the front wall, and we did them on the rear wall earlier, but they will give you a spot to attach an interior wall to if you decide to finish the interior at some point down the road. Next, we're going to frame out where the door will go, and we decided to do just less than 5 feet in height for the door. This way, it still seems like a door meant for the kids, but mom or dad can pop in without having to bend down too much, and it will also work better as the kids grow up. Double top plate. I haven't framed out the window area yet, so we'll put up the wall, and then as soon as the couple window options come in, I'll see what looks best, and then we'll frame it to make it work. This is a pretty small wall in the grand scheme of things, but always have a second person to help if the walls get much bigger than this to make sure they go up safely. 101 3/4, 101 7/8. Close enough for me. All right, so we're just going to set this up here just to get an idea of what it's going to look like. And you can, of course, have a longer board if you want to do a longer overhang. But we'll just take a look. Think about what you're doing for soffit as well. But I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to do a little bit less back here. And then I just like to tack it in place once I determine where I want to put it. I'm just taking a scrap 2x4 here, just so that the wind doesn't blow this thing away. Okay. We'll cut this scrap 2x4 into a 1 1/4 inch long piece, and that's going to help make the bird's mouth process real easy. And then I'm just going to line this up on the back of the building. Since I already did the siding, I'll go flush with that. Otherwise, I'd go flush with the framing. But we're just going to go back here, line it up, and we'll go straight over and down. And that will be our back. Then trace around the scrap piece toward the front of the rafter, and this will easily make your bird mouth cut without any math. And not that it's hard to do the math or to use a speed square, but this is just a simple little hack geared toward the average DIYer building a small structure to make it a little less intimidating and easier for the dad, the mom, the aunt, or uncle who is building this. I use a level to draw a plumb line on the rafter, which gives me the angle I need for a nice clean cut at the front and back of the rafter. You can then use a framer's square to measure out how far you want the overhang to go and make a mark. Okay, so I can take this straight line that I made up there, which is going to be plumb with the building, and I'm just going to get that angle by moving my miter saw until it matches up. So then we'll move this down. Just got to do our bird's mouth cuts. So right there and right here. So all we're gonna do is take our board one at a time, and we'll grab the template, which is the one that's already measured out. And I'm just going to line everything up Trace out the bird's mouths. There we go. We'll measure for the rafter spacing, 24 inches on center. So 24, back 3/4, forward 3/4. 48, back 3/4, forward 3/4. And then we'll go at the way end and 1.5 inches in. Have a stud right at the end. 124 inches on center. And one at the way end again. We'll use Simpson structural brackets to secure each outer rafter to the front and rear wall. I like to use screws for this upper portion, and then we'll use nails. That way they're not going to stick out in case you do want to finish the inside of your building. The hurricane clips go on quickly, and they make the rafter connection very strong. So we're just going to measure in from each side and make sure that we have 6 feet, which is the width of our building. Our overhang is going to be about 12 inches. I got a couple boards. I'm just going to make a little jig. It'll just help me hold up our board while I'm working on it. Then we'll take our square and line it up so that this front corner of our 2x6 is even with our rafter. Then I'm just going to do the same thing over here. I'll get my screw ready. Push this up till I'm happy with it. It's good. All right. Rest it on this right side. So the front inside corner comes up as high as it can before it hits our square. I used 3.5 inch long screws for each connection. Using screws for the rafter portion is kind of nice because you can back them out and adjust anything if things don't go together perfectly. The windows for the front wall arrived, and I held them up to figure out a good height so the kids would be able to see out of them. With all the framing, I have a bit limited space for the windows, so I went with 12-inch wide by 18-inch tall windows. Now these windows were $27 per window, and I will have a link to the supplies used in the description below. Good to go. We'll use this as a spacer. This is the height that I'm going to want the sill plate at. With the limited space I had to work with on the front wall and how small the windows were, I just did some really basic framing so I could fit the windows, and it's still going to be plenty strong. Let's just do a quick test fit and see how these windows are going to look. I used a Sawzall to cut out the bottom plate for the rough opening of the door. We'll start building our upper sidewall and take a rough measurement. All right, let's see how this fits. It's about 61 1/4. And that fits like a glove. See this next one? So when you do shift your Sub Fascia board down, and this matches up with your feed square, You'll notice that this does rest nice and easily. You can tack it down here and everything's gonna look pretty nice. Well, on the underside, because of the slope that we're doing, there's a little bit more of an angle. So you can see that this is honestly not gonna rest perfectly flush because we have that on the bottom. I'd say one of the simplest ways to fix this is to rip about 1/4 inch off the width of your sub fascia board, which is going to help your soffit sit flat against the underside, and you do this for both the front and back side of the playhouse. Here are a couple other ways you could do it, but you need to use a wider 2x8 board to start with to make this work. We'll just pop this off quick. Here's an example of beveling the top and what it looks like. It's like this. It's going to be perfect, so you're going to have a nice transition here. However, with your soffit, if it's lined up with the top, you're going to have a gap. I only have a 2x6 board, and I'm going to add a beveled strip to the underside, so I ripped a narrow strip on the table saw and tacked it to the bottom of that 2x6. But comment below and let me know how you like to do your sub fascia boards on single pitch shed roofs. I'm really interested to hear. After I took care of the rear sub fascia, I removed the front sub fascia board, beveled a 15-degree angle on the top side, and then made an angled strip on the underside. This will make it so the roof sheathing rests perfect, and so the soffit does from the underside as well. Then it was time to build the upper sidewalls. I cut the small boards with an angled cut on the one end, and then each board being slightly longer than I needed so that I could hold it in place and mark for the exact cut. Then I trimmed off each board to fit and put them in place. I broke out the framing nailer just to show it being used for a few boards, but you could continue with screws for a small structure like this one. I'm simply maintaining the same 16-inch on-center layout we used for the lower walls. We'll add some blocking for the left and right overhang, which will give additional support to the outer rafters and provide nailers to give your soffit extra support, depending on what type of soffit is used. I used additional 2x4s against the rafter that will act as nailers we can attach our 1x6 pine tongue and groove soffit to. We love the look of tongue and groove for soffit, but you could use something like 1/2 inch thick plywood to cut down on costs if you'd prefer. This process was then repeated on the other side as well. I then added a couple additional boards so everything was 16 inches on center for the front. Definitely frame this all out on the ground while you're building the wall if you have your windows all figured out. I'm only doing it in place since I was waiting for my windows to be shipped. If you plan to finish the inside and to do a ceiling, I'd recommend attaching a 2x4 board as a nailer to the top side of each sidewall. The next step was to finish installing the LP Smart Siding panels, and I'm showing it being installed after the walls have been put up. If I'm building a larger shed, I tend to attach the sheathing or the LP Smart Side panels once the walls are already up, so they're lighter and more manageable to raise with fewer people. And with a ledger board secured, it's honestly pretty easy to hang and get lined up nice and square. It's being installed from left to right on this side, and we will cut out the windows and door a bit later. There are many methods that will work to cut out your openings, like using a Sawzall or a circular saw, but I prefer using a router. This battery-powered router is a little bit underpowered, but it worked fine for this 3/8 inch thick LP Smart Siding. If you are doing thicker sheathing or panels, I'd just recommend using a router that plugs in. The pilot is going to ride against the framing of the rough opening, which gives you a fast and accurate way to make that cut. I moved onto the sidewall and cut this piece at an angle. The sidewall's max height is well under 8 feet, so it can go up without needing Z-flashing for a seam like you would need with a taller building if you're using these 8-foot panels. I'm working from right to left on this wall to be able to get by most efficiently with the panels. You just have to think about your layout and make sure the overlaps are placed correctly between panels. When using a router to go around the inside of the framing, you'll want to go around clockwise. Line up the ledger board and tack it in place so the siding will all rest evenly on the bottom. About 56, 4 feet over, 70. I typically use 7/16 inch thick LP Smart Siding panels, but I chose to go with 3/8 inch thickness to cut down on the building cost since it was about $20 cheaper per panel, and with 16 inch on center walls, it's plenty durable. Get your measurements, mark them on the panel, snap a chalk line or use a pencil and a straight edge, and then make each cut. I'm using screws at each corner and along the framing of the window to secure it, and then I'll come back later with a siding nailer to do the rest of the nailing pattern, or you could come back and simply add a bunch more screws if you don't have a siding nailer. Jack really wanted to see what the windows were going to look like, so again, I'm temporarily installing them to be able to check them out. Next, I blocked between the rafters and beveled the top of the 2x6 boards to match the height of the rafters. If you aren't planning on doing soffit, this is probably the best solution. If you are going to be doing soffit and plan on venting this or a larger shed, you could take an inch or two off the height of the blocking so air can pass through from the front to the back after it's come through your soffit vents. Another option would be to drill holes in the blocking, which I'm going to do later, but comment below and let me know what you typically do to ensure proper ventilation through your blocking on a larger structure with a single pitch roof. Next, I put on the roof sheathing, and I'm using 2 full sheets of 5/8 inch thick OSB. If you're working on your own, attaching a couple temporary boards to hold the plywood on the roof while you lift it up will come in handy. This roof is specifically designed for 2 full sheets of plywood to fit perfectly without cutting, so it goes on real quick. A chalk line was snapped to mark each rafter, and then I came back with a nailer to finish attaching the sheathing. I missed a rafter with a fastener, so I just grinded it off. I finished nailing up the siding using a coil siding nailer with 2-inch ring shank nails. I wouldn't go out and buy a siding nailer if this is all you plan on building, since you can easily use screws or nail it up by hand, but it sure makes the process go quick. A couple coats of paint will quickly transform your siding and make it look great. I'm rolling on a total of 2 coats of a dark gray colored paint that ties in with the color of our home. I'll have a link to the exact paint I used in the description. A roller works well for the siding, and I use a brush to get into any hard-to-reach areas and to paint the skids, which I think makes them look better. Now, if you are interested in building a 6x6 playhouse like this, and would like the plans, materials list, and cost estimator, there is a link in the description with more information. And that second coat will even things out and make it look sharp. I held up a cedar board because I thought about using it like I did on another shed project, but I decided to switch things up this time to get a new look and to save some money. They had 3/8 inch thick by 8 inch wide and 12 feet long LP 38 series siding for about $14 a board, and this ended up working great for the playhouse. I tested out the board to see how it would look and marked where to make each end cut.
That's a little bit more than I want. I'm going to trim off about a 1/2 inch. That way I won't have such a huge overlap. I think it'll look a little nicer.
So I removed the board and ripped it down in width on the table saw. Repeat the process for the other side so that all the cuts are made before painting. I like to paint the front and back of the fascia board to give it a little extra protection in case water ever gets behind it. So 2 coats were rolled on all 4 fascia boards, and this paint dries pretty quickly, so I honestly don't have to wait long between coats. Once the fascia boards have dried, go ahead and secure them to the sub fascia. I attached the sides first, and then did the front and back fascia boards, which will overlap the side boards. Using the engineered LP Smart Siding boards is a lot cheaper than using thicker 1x material, and for something like this, it worked really well. And you can always go over nail and screw heads to hide them and to touch things up. Next up, I cut a piece of drip edge to size for the back side of the roof. I installed the drip edge according to the recommendations of the shingle manufacturer when using a synthetic underlayment. I'm using 1-inch roofing nails to attach the 2-inch drip edge. Of course, the wind decided to come up when I got started with the synthetic underlayment, but I was able to quickly tack it down in the corners to hold it in place while rolling it out. Now, tar paper is the other option, and it's quite a bit cheaper, but I do like the synthetic underlayment, and I will use the extra on other projects. Once it was on, I cut the excess and used some plastic cap nails to help hold it down. Next up was the drip edge for the rake sides of the building where it will go over the underlayment. And it was windy and that drip edge kept flopping around, so I used some tape to hold it to the roof until I started to get some nails in. A self-adhering starter shingle roll was positioned along the eave, flush with the drip edge. I used a roofing nailer to secure it down, but a hammer and roofing nails would work just fine. Then I ran the starter roll up the rake sides of the building, making sure to overlap the eave starter roll. One thing I should have done is cut a corner off the overlapping portion, so there's a continuous strip of adhesive around the perimeter, but I didn't, so I'll just add some sealant to the corners later. I measured and marked every 24 inches and snapped chalk lines, so I had a few guidelines to see if my shingles were going on straight as I progressed up the roof. I started putting the first row of shingles on and overhung the drip edge about a ½ inch on both the eave and the rake side. I start with a full shingle and will cut the last in the row to size. Your shingles will come with instructions on how to stagger the rows and will show a nailing pattern. For these, I use a total of 4 nails per shingle. For the second row, or course, you trim 6½ inches off the first shingle on the side that will overhang the rake. Then continue with full shingles until you get to the end and cut as needed. For the third row, using this brand of architectural shingles, you'll cut off 13 inches from that first shingle. And for the fourth row, you'll cut off 19½ inches. This is going to continue through the sixth row, or course. For row 7, you'll start the pattern over using a full shingle to start. And this is all specific to the instructions for Owens Corning architectural shingles. The process goes fairly quickly once you get going, and maintaining the proper overlap is pretty easy with the lines on the shingles.
So basically we're putting a nail 1 inch from each end and then about 12 inches apart on the inside. This is what we have for waste after 6 full rows. So then for our 7th row, we start with another full sheet on the end, square it up, and tack it in place.
Of course, a metal roof is another great option, and you could easily modify this project by adding one if you'd like.
And then we'll periodically just check how we're doing, see if we're relatively in line. I got about 18 3/4 there, and 18 5/8, so within an eighth. Once you get that first one on, it's pretty easy. Just line it up with that white line and kind of the top here. Make sure it looks good. Hit it. And then we can pivot that second to get it lined up. Looks good. About 1 inch in.
I use a scrap piece of plywood to lay the shingles on so I can cut them to size with a razor blade. Have a few extra blades for the project because they dull fairly quickly when cutting shingles. This was my final roll of shingles, and I'm just going to cover the nails with roofing sealant and anything else that needs covering, and use a larger drip edge instead of trying to squeeze one more row on. I cut the shingles flush with the front of the building prior to putting on the drip edge. I added a bead of sealant to the underside of the drip edge and then tacked it in place with some nails. Then it was time to add a little sealant over the nail heads and to any seams. And that's a quick look at the finished roof with onyx black architectural shingles. It was finally time to permanently install the windows, and I started by using flashing tape around the lower portion of the window and then checked for level. These little windows are easy to adjust, and you don't need shims like you might with a normal or a heavier window. When putting in the screws, I would recommend pre-drilling so you don't accidentally slip your bit off the screw and send it into the glass. I'm going with a pretty narrow trim board around these small windows, so after applying the flashing to the sides and tops, I'm cutting the tape so it won't show from behind the trim once it's on. And don't add flashing over the bottom portion of the window. This way water can drain out if it does get behind it. Repeat the process for any remaining windows you'll be installing, and after the flashing is installed, I trim it down to about 1 inch to 1.5 inches in width, since the trim I'll be using is only 1 3/4 inches wide for this Kids Playhouse. Flashing along the sill area is going to help protect the wood from moisture and water damage. For some reason, there was a little metal tab on one of the windows preventing it from sitting flat against the siding, so a grinder was used to get rid of it. The windows we're using are really easy to install, and I think the black looks sharp. The front 2 windows do slide up and down to help get some fresh air and airflow into the space. A little more flashing, and I was good to go. I did decide I'll do soffit venting in the future, so I'm drilling some 1 1/4 inch holes in the blocking so that air will be able to come through each section. In the past, I've simply used shorter blocking, but let me know how you typically do the blocking to help aid in venting your sheds if you do soffit vents. I measured for the first soffit board, which is 1x6 pine tongue and groove. I think tongue and groove looks really classy and it's easy to install. After putting on that first board, I move onto the sides and I basically cut shorter pieces to fit. I slide them into place and then use a nailer to attach them. This part of the project goes quickly, and I think the little extra time and investment for tongue and groove is a nice touch, but you could just as well use something like 1/2 inch plywood. You could stain it and have a great looking soffit as well. I made a little template to help me so that I get the cut perfect on my larger board. And so it just connects here and then it's gonna run all the way down and have this little notch. I did the same thing on the other side. Right here. Make sure it's in the correct orientation. I traced the templates onto the board that will fit around the outside walls of the playhouse and then used a jigsaw to make the cut. The last piece needed to be ripped down a couple inches to fit perfectly. Once it was cut, I slid the tongue into the groove and used a little pry bar or a claw bar to help get it in. One more full tongue and groove board was put in on the front side, and on some of my other builds I've put can lights in the soffit, which is a nice addition if you are building a larger structure, maybe as an office or a hangout spot. A thin strip was added to get the perfect fit for the soffit toward the front. To protect the soffit and give it a finished look, a clear coat of exterior oil-based polyurethane was rolled on. 2 coats will even things out and give it a long-lasting finish. Here I'm ripping the LP lap siding board to 1 3/4 inches in width, and this is going to be used for the window trim. To help the trim sit flush over the window and against the siding, you may want to cut a rabbet on the backside. Test it out to see how it looks and then give it some paint. I brushed on 2 coats of a solid color black stain. Once the trim had dried, I attached each piece around the window, and I like the look of a narrow trim board for this smaller type of project. If you do find this video helpful and enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps getting the project seen so we can inspire more DIYers. The narrow trim works especially on the front side since we have limited siding space between the windows, door, and corner trim. I have it beveled to fit underneath the ceiling or the soffit. And then I have 15-degree angle as well. And then I'm just going to pre-assemble these first before we attach. Just gonna run some glue and pre-assemble these before we attach them as the trim to the building. I'm using leftover channel siding from our home to create the corner trim on the shed. I ripped it to 2 1/4 inches in width. It has a rough finish, which looks good with a whitewash colored stain. Now, cedar has gone up a lot in price in the last few years, so a pine or LP trim are other solutions, or you could even use that thinner LP lap siding we used for the window trim and cut it down in width, somewhere probably between 2 and 3 inches. Then it was time to figure out a door for the playhouse. Now, there are a lot of ways to build a door, and we're going to do a door jamb and build it similar to a real door for this project. And I'm going to be honest, we were leaving the next day for a family trip, so I was trying to get a million things done that day, and I kind of had to rush to get the door done and just use the materials I already had in the garage. I'm building the back part of the door out of some scrap 3/4 inch thick plywood I had in the shop. And then I'm using 1x material cut to 2 1/2 inches in width to frame the perimeter of the door. I thought tongue and groove boards could give the door a neat look, so the boards were cut into short pieces and then secured in place. I routed areas on the side of the door for the hinges, attached them to the door and to the jamb, squared some things up, and installed the door. Now, I just wanted to have the building closed in and functioning before our trip, so I'll be adding door stops to the jamb, adding a finish to the door, and then some other hardware at a future time. The same trim I used for the windows was used around the door, except it was cut to a 2-inch width. A handle was put on the outside and a simple ball catch so that it stays shut when it's closed. As far as cost goes, here's a quick breakdown so you have an idea. The platform for the floor was $275 for the joists, skids, hardware, and subfloor. All the studs for the walls came to $176. The siding was a big percentage of the cost, coming in at $372, and something you could certainly cut costs by using other materials. Roofing was another big cost and something you'll have leftover materials from. And all in all, the stout little playhouse built like a real home came to $1,833. Something to note though, if you wanted to scale up to do an 8x8 or a 10x10 shed, the costs aren't significantly more. I actually built a 10x10 storage shed for about $3,000, and so an 8x8 shed would fall somewhere in between. What do you think?
Do you want to come inside? Come here, can you?
Once we get back to the project, I'll add some caulking, put in some soffit vents, add lighting, and potentially finish out the inside.
How's the playhouse?
Good.
Good. It's nap time.
My other thought is to lift up the playhouse, set it on 6x6 posts about 4 feet up, and then to add a deck around it and attach the slides and swings from the current playset. And if I do, I'll do a video on it. I've also done videos about installing vinyl plank flooring in a shed, installing a mini split air conditioner and heater in a shed, and building similar but larger structures. If you would like to build this playset or other sheds I've done videos on, you can find plans in the description below, and hopefully this gives you some ideas and inspiration to build a small structure, no matter how big or how small. Comment below, let me know what you plan to build. Remember, if you can build this, you can build a similar style building bigger. Cheers, guys.